When you work in Excel, you will once in a while run into a situation where you would like to put a background, in some way highlight some cells, but not the whole thing, not a whole row, not a whole column, but just very specific cells that meet certain criteria. Well, the good news is you can do that through conditional formatting. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's learn all about conditional formatting today. As I look at our example spreadsheet, I can see that we have first name, last name, and then we have February through May with number scores. So I think we can safely assume that this is some sort of a class setup and that these numbers for February through May are assignments that people have done, and the maybe average of those scores, or maybe they only had one project per month. That's possible as well. And then there's a number for a final project, and then there's a final average. When I click on that final average, I can see that it's kind of a weighted average, in that the average of the scores from February through May is added to the average for just G2 by itself. So the final project is really counting as half of that final score. And then in column I, we have a final project received date. So evidently there was a deadline that if it wasn't met by that particular deadline, then there might be some points deducted for that as well. As I look at the final averages, I see that while none of them are below 70, the ones that are above 90 are barely above 90, and that seems perhaps a little low in this kind of grading scale. So let's look at the scores and get an idea of why we have the scores that we have. Well, to do that, I'm just going to select all of the numbers. And then from the Home tab on the ribbon, I'm going to go to the right of the middle of the ribbon and go to the Styles group where we have Conditional Formatting, and click that drop down. And we have all sorts of different kinds of conditional formatting that we can add. But let's start with Highlight Cells Rules. Now, this really means we're going to create a rule, and then we're going to highlight the cells that match that rule. So let's start with greater than, and click on it. And you can see that it's already trying to give us an answer. Let me pull our dialog box over here a little bit. So it has sort of arbitrarily picked 82.5. Maybe that's a median score. But what we want to do is find the ones that are greater than, and I think to include 90, we need to actually say greater than 89. And then it's going to use that light red fill with a dark red text as the default. Well, let's go to the right of where that's defined. Click the drop down, because I think the greater than should just be in green. Makes more sense to me, and we'll click OK. And so now as I click off, we can see that we do have scores in the 90s, or even a couple of hundreds here throughout the different months. And even for the final project, we have some higher scores, but for the final average, we only have those two that are barely over 90. Well, let's see what else we can just see by looking at the conditional formatting. So let me select all of the number cells again, and we'll go to Conditional Formatting, and we'll go to this Highlight Cells Rules, and this time we're going to look for less than. So we'll say less than, and I want to find the ones that are 70 and below maybe. Let's just go with less than 70. And so we'll type the 70, and light red fill with a dark red text makes sense to me for below 70, so we'll click OK. And so now we're starting to see some of those lower scores that may be part of the just general kind of low scores. Well, let's go back, select all of our numbers, go to Conditional Formatting, Highlight Cells Rules, and this time let's look for the ones that are between, well, 70 and 90. Well, 70 and 89. So we'll type a 70 and we'll type that 89. But I don't think that the red fill is going to work. We need something different. So let's click the drop down. This time let's use the yellow fill and we'll click OK. And click off. And so now this gives us an even better idea of why the scores are the way they are. The majority of the monthly scores are also within that 70 to 90 bracket. Well, let's select our numbers one more time. Go to Conditional Formatting, because in Highlight Cells Rules we also have equal to. And let's see if we can find any scores that are equal to 100. Now we've kind of used all of the default backgrounds and text here. So let's go down to Custom Format, and we can go with the Font tab, and in the middle here and then toward the right where it says Automatic Color, we could choose a different color. Now this is the font, so I think I'm going to go with a dark blue. And then I can go to the fill and go with a light blue for the fill. And we'll say OK, and then we'll say OK. And as I click off, we can see the two 100s that are there. So we've looked at all of the different ways we can compare numbers by using conditional formatting, and it really gives us a pretty good idea of why those averages are the way they are. Now, if I decide that I want to clear all of the conditional formatting, I can go to the Conditional Formatting button, click the drop down, and then come down to the bottom where I really have two choices. At the very bottom, I can manage the rules, so I can click on that. And I don't have anything selected, so in the upper left here where it says Show Formatting Rules For, well, I don't have a selection. So I need to go to the drop down to the right of that and say this worksheet instead. And you can see that here are all of the rules that we have created and how they are defined, but we have some choices. We can select any of these rules and edit the rule, or we could delete the rule. So we could delete the rules one at a time from here, or if I go to close in the lower right, go back to the conditional formatting, I can also come down to the next to the last choice, and I can clear the rules either from selected cells or from the entire sheet, which is what we'll do. Now we had some other options here as well. So let me go to the names and let's select the names. And then let's go to Conditional Formatting, Highlight Cells Rules, and this time we're going to go to Text That Contains. So we'll click that. And it's already tried to select just the first name in that selection of names, Lori. But let's go with something else. Let's get a little braver here. Let's try typing a D. And you can see that it has found all of the names that have a D in them, for example. Now, it would make more sense if we had a really long list of people, and maybe it's not alphabetical, and because it's kind of random, we've decided that we need to maybe just type in a name and see what happens. Well, let's type Lang. And again, the default is always going to be this light red fill with a dark red text, but we'll just click OK, and we can see that very easily we have found Arthur Lang. Let's also look at the possibility of somebody turning in their project late. So to do that, we need to come over to I2 and select the dates. Now from here, we can also set up a rule. Let's go to Conditional Formatting, go to our Highlight Cells Rules, and come down to a date occurring. And we have a couple of options here. The first is that we can say, well, let's click this drop down because it wasn't yesterday, but look at that. Today, tomorrow, the last 7 days, last week, this week, next week, last month, this month, next month. But the only thing is with this conditional formatting choice is you're within, say, a 3-month period. So if you get out of that 3-month period, then you're going to need to do something else. So we'll just go with this month. And I kind of like the idea of the yellow fill maybe. And matter of fact, let's change that. Let's go with just the red border and click OK. So when I click off, it's a little hard to see, but this all has now a red border. Well, let me select this again because we could also do this. Let's go to Conditional Formatting, Highlight Cells Rules, and let's say that we want to see if anything is late. So we could go to greater than. And it's picked up on May 3rd because that is kind of a median date. But let's say that the actual deadline was May 4th. So I could try to type in May 4th, or I can come over here to this little arrow that points up. And when I click on it, it compacts the dialog box so that I could click on the cell, let's see, May 4th, and it should change here to the cell reference I6, which it did. Then I'm going to come back over to the right to this drop down arrow, which is the expand the dialog box button. And so now I have I6, but I don't really want to fill those in with light red. Let's do something else here. Let's go with red text and click OK. And I need to click off for us to see, but we see that May 5th, those dates were late. They were past the deadline for that final project. So we have used our conditional formatting to look at the dates and even names and a lot of different scores as well. Now, conditional formatting, when you use this highlight cells rules and you look at duplicate values, depending, that could be very helpful, but there are other places in Excel that might even be more helpful where you can delete the duplicates. Well, let's go ahead and select our numbers here and then go to conditional formatting and the highlight cells rules, and we can do duplicate values. Oh my goodness. And it's hard to distinguish what is what here, but we'll click OK. And you can see that, okay, there's more than 189, there's more than 171, there's more than 170. So that is probably the least specific, and it's just not a very good choice for what we have in our spreadsheet. Now, in other spreadsheets, this could be extremely helpful. It just depends on what you're doing and what you are trying to do with your data as to whether that works. Then again, we'll just go to conditional formatting. We're going to come all the way down to clear rules, and we're going to just clear rules from the entire sheet so that we can go back and look at some more examples. For the next set of conditional formatting options that we might want to use, let's simply click on the final average here and select those cells, and then go back to conditional formatting and go to our second choice here, which is top bottom rules. And again, we have all sorts of things that we can look at. We can look at the top 10 items or the top 10%, which might be different. We can look at the bottom 10 items. I'm not sure we even have 10 items here, or the bottom 10%. We can see what's above average or below average. Now let's start with the top 10 items. And it doesn't need to be just 10. As you can see, that would be most of the scores. So let's go with the top 3. And I can either type in 3 or I can use this little down arrow just to the right. And again, I have that default light red fill, and I'm going to switch it to green fill and click OK. When I click off, then I have the top 3 scores. Now that could be slightly different if we look at the top percent. So let's go to conditional formatting and clear the rules for the entire sheet. Let's again select our final average column though. Go to top bottom rules and let's look at the top 10%. And maybe we'll just go with the top 10% and keep even the light red fill, click OK. And in this case, only one person was in the top 10%. Well, let's again clear that out. And we'll clear the rules from the entire sheet. Select those scores. And let's see what else we could do here. We can look at the bottom 10 items, except we can change that again to say the bottom 3, and this time I'm just going to type in 3, click OK, and here are the bottom 3 scores. They're all in the 70s, which certainly makes sense. Let me select those numbers, go back to conditional formatting, and we're going to clear the rules, but this time we're just going to clear rules from the selected cells. Keep them selected as we go to conditional formatting. Look at the top bottom rules, and we were at the bottom 10%. Let's see if that makes a difference. And now we only have one score that is in the bottom 10% when I click OK. Well, let me again keep that selected, go to conditional formatting, and let's go to clear the rules from selected cells. Let's go back to conditional formatting, because besides the top and the bottom 10% or 10 items, we can also look at who's above average. And I think I'll go ahead and make that our green fill. And while we're here, let's go ahead and add the conditional formatting for the top bottom rules and go to the below average and keep that in red. And click off. So you can see how you can apply more than one rule to the same cells, and in this case we can see exactly who was above average and who was below average. I'm going to select all those cells, go to conditional formatting, and again clear the rules for the selected cells. Now from here, when I click on conditional formatting, we can see that besides those choices, we can then come down and we can look at data bars, color scales, and icon sets, which we will look at next. Let's now look at just 1 month and apply some conditional formatting rules to this month of February. So we'll go to conditional formatting, and we can come down to the data bars. Now, the data bars can have either a gradient fill or a solid fill. And as I rest my mouse on these different choices, you can kind of see in that February column how they look. Now, notice that the fill, the bars, can go underneath the numbers that you are displaying, which makes some of these easier to read, and especially if you're printing, easier to read than other numbers. So just to make it a little easier to see, I'm going to go with this orange data bar that is a gradient fill, and it's starting dark on the left and then getting gradually lighter as it goes to the right. And then I'm going to try to widen out that column a little bit, but notice that no matter how much I try to widen out the column, I still kind of have an issue with trying to read some of these numbers. So that's something that you kind of need to look at and determine what you think is appropriate for what you are doing. Well, let's also then go to March, select those cells, let's go to conditional formatting, and instead of data bars, let's look at color scales. Now, these tend to be kind of bright. So we have green, yellow, red, and it's only because we have a cell that has 100 in it, or actually there are 2 of them, that you can tell what the top number is and what the bottom number is. But you could kind of look at that, and as I hover my mouse over the different schemes, you can kind of see generally they reverse each other. So you would need to have a legend so that people know what's what. Now, down in the third row here, we have just gradient colors of green, and that maybe makes a little more sense. Or even just green and yellow. But when you have three colors, it's a little more difficult to figure out how that works. So here we have green and white, and it's kind of a color gradient that will apply for March. And then let's also apply something for April, so you can see how that works. And we'll go to Conditional Formatting and come to the icon sets. Now the icon sets are really interesting in that you have arrows, and you generally have a set of 3 to 5 arrows depending on how you want that to look. You have different shapes, which again you might need to have some sort of a legend that would interpret those 3 to 4 different shapes, because the colors by themselves may not be all that helpful. You have indicators, so you have basically pluses and minuses, or checks and exclamations depending. In circles you have some flags here, and then the X and the exclamation and the check mark. So again, maybe a little difficult to interpret unless people have, say, a 100 or a really high, like 97 is relatively high. So that helps them kind of figure out what that is all about. I kind of like, actually I kind of like the flags. It just doesn't tell me much. So maybe we'll go with these circles here. And then in May, we'll look at the last set of indicators for the conditional formatting. We'll look at the icon sets. Let's select May, go to Conditional Formatting, and we have the icon sets. We looked at directional and shapes and indicators, but let's look at the ratings as well. These may be a little easier to tell because we have the stars that are filled in or sort of halfway filled in. We have the kind of pie charts here, and there's 5 levels of those, which makes it a little easier to tell what's good and what's bad. We have the kind of a grid that is 5 figures totally, but it's 4 squares. So that might be a little difficult, although with the 97 being filled and the 76 being kind of neutral with the gray, maybe that helps. And then they have charts. So we have either 4 possibilities or 5 ratings. Let's go with the 5 ratings and put in the charts. And again, you may feel like you need to widen out the column a little bit just to make it a little more readable and more separation between the chart and the actual numbers. And so some people really like these different choices that you've looked at. And some people really prefer maybe just the solid background with a different color of text. But that is all up to you and the context of what you are doing. I've reset our example back to the beginning because there is one more setting that we might want to look at. So let me select, say, the numbers here and go back to conditional formatting. And then the one option that we still haven't looked at is simply New Rule. When we click on New Rule, we can see that we have even more choices here. So, for example, we can select a rule type, and this is format all cells based on their values. So that's like the first option that we looked at. Format only cells that contain, format only top and bottom ranked values. Let's look at that one. And when we do, then down below that, we can maybe in more of a chart form fill out the information that we want to fill out. So we want to format values that rank in the top, and then we need to decide, well, let's say, I think we used 3 before, and then we have a checkbox for % of the selected range, or just top 3. And then we have a preview, but right now it says there's no format that is set. So we would go to the right and go to Format. And then it's defaulted to fill, so let's go with that first. But notice that we have 4 tabs running across the top. So really, we could go to number, and then we have all of these different kinds of formatting for number that we might want to use. We have font, and we could go to say, oh, you know what, I want it bold and maybe a larger size, if that would be possible. That's grayed out right now. We could make the color, instead of automatic, make it, what's a color we haven't used? Maybe this kind of burnt orange brown thing, and that gives us then a preview of that color. We could add in a border if we want to do that, and we could say, yeah, I want to add in an outline, and what is the color that we want to use? Maybe we want to use blue for the outline, and then I can kind of come around here and change the color. And then for the fill, what do we want to use? Well, let's see, we used this brown, which brings us here, but let's go with, say, let's go with a light green. And then click OK. And then we get our preview, and we will click OK again and click off. And so now we can see how we have set up a brand new rule that does not in any way match what we have done previously. So you have all sorts of latitude and ability to make changes so that when you want to set up your conditional formatting, it's exactly what you need and what you want to use to best interpret your data. So again, conditional formatting, we've looked at highlight cells rules, we've looked at top and bottom rules, data bars, color scales, icon sets. We've even created a new rule, and then we looked at how we can clear out those rules by using either the selected cells or the entire sheet. And then with manage rules, again, we would need to probably go to worksheet in this case, but we have the list of the rules, and we can edit them from here, or delete the rule, or even add a new rule, or duplicate the rule that we have selected. So just a myriad of options as you look at conditional formatting in Excel. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning, where you'll find such great resources as Universal Class, LinkedIn Learning, and Learning Express Library. Be sure to also find us on Facebook and YouTube. On Facebook, you can find us at MCPL 360, and on YouTube, you can find us on our MCPL MO channel, and be sure to look for our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist. We will premiere new videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock, but don't worry, all of our videos stay right there all the time. So if you miss one of our premieres, don't worry, you can come back and find them when it's convenient to you. Hope to see you there.